Luna. Are you gonna hang out? Are you my appa? Are you my appa? Look at how cute you are. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna start now. Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be chatting through the last batch of episodes for Avatar: The Last Airbender. Before jumping into any specifics, I just want to say a big thank you. I think I've probably said thank you at the end of the first and second season's batch reviews and maybe in the tier rankings of the episodes from the previous seasons, but in case you haven't seen it or heard me say it already, I really can't thank all of you enough. When I started Avatar, I was just expecting to get to enjoy a show that for a lot of people has so much nostalgia, has a lot of meaning to it, and that they grew up really loving, was really impactful to them. But I wasn't expecting to also be able to have such a wonderful community element to me watching through the show. So I owe so much of what has been a fantastic experience to all of you. Obviously, over on my main channel, I talk about books and have experienced fandom culture over the years, and I honestly, truly can say I think that this fandom is among one of the most welcoming and nicest that I have ever come across. So thank you so much to all of you. It has been absolutely wonderful, and as a result of just how much I have not only enjoyed the show, of course, but enjoyed getting to talk with all of you and getting to see your thoughts, I do intend after this to do some Avatar content beyond just the reviews. And so the first thing I wanted to do, I'm thinking about doing something with my husband, but as far as the community-based things, one of the first things I'm wanting to do is ask all of you your Avatar unpopular opinions or your Avatar hot takes. And it doesn't necessarily have to be negative. If you have a negative thought about something, maybe an episode that it seems like everybody loves but you, or a character everybody loves but you, something like that, of course, feel free to share that. But also, if there's episodes everybody really hates but that you love, and if you have just in general the opposite opinion of what generally the fandom does, then feel free to share that. I'm going to have that question over on my community tab. All of that said, officially jumping into, it feels sad to say, but the last batch of episodes for the third season. I think I'm going to, for the most part, speak more generally since the Sozin's Comet episodes were essentially one giant episode. And as many of you know, I've been going through and I take notes while watching, but the last chunk were so engaging and so much of it was very visual and a lot of action that I kind of just got sucked in and I watched, and I didn't write as many thoughts down, but I do have some general thoughts that I wanted to get through. So first, the episode that we left off on was that we got through part 2 of The Boiling Rock, which means the first episode from this was The Southern Raiders. For me, this was one of the absolute strongest episodes of the entire season, and one of the strongest episodes for the entire show, just because of the emotional impact it had for Katara, not just as an individual character, but her arc as a whole. I remember, I think it was way back in season 1, where I was saying like, oh, I hope at some point we dig a little bit more into their parents, meaning Katara and Sokka's parents. Some of you were like, they will. I didn't realize it was going to take all the way until nearly the end of the entire show to finally really dig into that. And digging into that, it resulted in depicting something very dark, this anger that Katara has been holding on to. And I think it was fitting to have Zuko be the person that sort of, I feel bad saying brought that out in her, but it's almost like she felt safe enough to reveal that she had that within her, because immediately and understandably Aang is kind of like, no, Katara, you need to try and basically let go of that anger, and you don't want to let that control you. And it's not that she let it take her over, but it's that she allowed herself to tap into it. And yes, she did have to ask the tough question of what am I going to do with this anger? And I feel like that emotion is something obviously Zuko has so much experience with himself. So it made sense that he was the one that could kind of help her through that processing. And I think it made sense for her character in the long run to not go through with vengeance, but rather just ending. I think what was justice for her was more internal. And I think it did a great job of showing that that guy is not exactly sitting pretty. His life is pretty pathetic, and oddly that was almost satisfying enough, as dark as that is to say. I just think that this episode was exceptional, and I'm not going to harp on previous episodes or anything like that in comparison, but I think something I've wanted more of this season in general, which it's not like the season's been bad or anything like that, but I just wanted a lot more of these kinds of moments throughout this season, and I'm glad that we got this, because I thought it was great. As far as any specifics that I wrote down, I wrote, can Iroh show up? Because I still am like, where's Iroh? While I was watching this, because I'm like, I miss him. And then the quote, you sound like Jet, when they're talking to Katara about her wanting to get revenge and her wanting to do whatever it takes and things like that. And I did appreciate that tie back to what it did to Jet to succumb to that anger. Because while maybe his cause was just and his motivations were just, he was willing to frame innocent people if it meant persuading others to join his side. He was willing to have innocent people die pretty frequently. And I think he kind of lost sight a little bit of what he really wanted and what would have provided justice for the wrongs that his people had to endure. So I think while for Katara it wasn't on such a large scale, I did think that that comparison with Jet really hit, and I thought it was an accurate and apt thing to point out. I also wrote, this is not important, but I also wrote, Katara looks pretty cool. Her cool little outfit that she had on during reconnaissance, sort of. I thought she looked kind of awesome. But anyway, and then last I wrote, when they said it's your turn to take a field trip with Zuko, because I do feel like they've kind of like, I structured it where it's like, okay, now Aang needs one, now Sokka needs one, and then here's the Katara one, and the Katara one was good. The Sokka one was great. It is kind of interesting that the Sokka one is the one that resulted in a two-parter, but I feel that all of the episodes where Zuko has had deeper moments with the other characters have been among the best moments in the entire season. So I really love this episode. Episode 17 is the Ember Island Players. I will be so curious to know, is this a fan favorite or a hated episode? Because I thought it was hilarious. Is it the most important of episodes overall? No. But was it very funny? Yes. And for me, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of the humor within this season in particular has not been hitting home for me. I feel like previous seasons had a lot of humor I literally laughed out loud or I was caught off guard by, and some of it was predictable, but the way in which the voice actors said their lines ended up making me laugh anyway. And there was just some so unexpectedly stupid things that I chuckled a lot. I just have loved the humor throughout the show, and then this season, just certain jokes are not landing, or the way in which they're executing the joke, like the way, for example, the beach episode is navigated. I just feel like it's so cringy. I still can't stand that episode, even after everything, especially after the fact that I pretty much predicted exactly Azula's plotline, but we'll get to that when we get to the Sozin comment. But anyway, so a lot of the humor has not been to my liking this season, unfortunately, which does not mean it's bad, of course. It's just humor is subjective. But this episode I thought was just so fun, breaking the fourth wall, kind of recapping our journey in a really entertaining way. And I think it takes the recap concept that you get so often in everything, it feels like. It's not like it's just an animated show thing. I mean, even sitcoms have the let's reflect back on Chandler and Monica's relationship before they get married or whatever, right? There's always some kind of recap of things partway through the season before we kind of turn around into this really important big moment. And I feel like what they did with that was brilliant, and it was funny, and it was stupid, and it was just a good time. I also really liked when they have a quote, a surprisingly knowledgeable merchant of cabbage, because Cabbage Guy is somebody that my husband and I would be like, oh, hey, it's Cabbage Guy, as we were watching the show. So I like that they acknowledged that. Quote, you're the only woman who took my mind off of food, which that made me laugh a lot. There was just so many stupid fun jokes in this episode that I thought were fantastic. And this has to be, please tell me that this is a thing that other people really appreciate when they put, did Jet just die? It's really unclear. I really like the self-awareness in that too, because even I've been like, did he die? I guess maybe he died. I don't know. Is he coming back? Is he dead? I feel like he's dead. And now it seems like the show is poking fun at that, which I really love. I love that they did this in this fashion. And then I put, aw, poor Aang, love triangle, question mark. And then I put, aw, Toph talking about Iroh. That was one of the best parts of this episode, even though this episode was really funny. But when you get the moment between Toph and Zuko, if you need a recap, where she's telling him, hey, I actually met your uncle and he loved you and adored you. I thought that was really sweet. And it was so important, I think, for Zuko, especially given the absence of Iroh that we've had this whole season and the absence of Iroh now that Zuko has changed. By the way, how heartbreaking would it have been if we never saw Iroh again? Can you imagine, like, Zuko finally changed and there's this always, like, what if? And I can't believe some of my last moments. Obviously, some of them were nice, but some of my last moments with my uncle were me being so cruel to him. I'm so glad that that would be really weirdly morbid and dark for the show to do that. I would be sad. But I'm glad. Obviously, we had a wonderful moment, and now getting to that. So, Sozin's comet. I'm just going to go through, like I said at the beginning, I got very sucked in, and I was just like, I'm just here for this. I think there were some incredible highs in the whole Sozin's comet section of this, and then I thought there was some weaker moments. I actually think that the show has had some of its best moments outside of the finales. And I think this is in part because of a lot of the central themes of the show. So much of it is about overcoming intergenerational trauma, the messages that you've been fed your whole life and breaking out of that and what it actually takes, the internal strife and what amount of time and what amount of effort and introspection is required to actually push away from everything that you were told you're supposed to value. And then, of course, there's the bigger things about the conquering of other peoples and how you justify that, how you convince an entire society that that is the right thing to do. It's the just thing to do. It's the necessary thing to do. I think so many of those bigger things, and then also some of those really personal things, are not going to suddenly come through at the very end. You're going to see a lot of those pivotal moments throughout. And as a result, I think that is why we've gotten some of the best moments in the middle of seasons as opposed to the very end of seasons or the very beginning. And for me, this is not bothersome whatsoever. I'm not somebody who needs the absolute best moments to be in the finales. And while I think there are some things that could have been done to have made the finale just a tiny bit stronger, I don't mind that. I think some of my absolute favorite moments were more so contained in other episodes and other parts of the series. All that said, I do find that, and it's something I've been kind of saying quite often, I feel like Ozai as a villain, he's more so an obstacle that is in the way of what our heroes are actually trying to fight up against. He's sort of like a physical manifestation of a lot of the bigger themes. And so thus it's like if the themes are bigger in scope, he's sort of more contained. And he isn't as fleshed out as a lot of other villains from other shows or other stories. I don't know that he needs to be, but I do think that this whole section could have hit a little stronger if we had a little bit more with him. But it doesn't mean that I think that these episodes weren't entertaining or that the fight wasn't awesome. In a sense, it's almost like all we need to know is that he's an enormous threat and he has a lot of power, because this whole last section was just almost like cinematic masterpiece with watching the action between him and Aang. I do think that we've gotten a few kind of let's just have some plot convenience happen at the very end of all 3 seasons a little bit. I think in the first season, obviously, we had Yue and the moon. The moon doesn't look like this. I don't know why I did that. And then in the second season, you have Aang. I think they alluded to the Avatar state and tapping into that a lot more than they did in season 1 with Yue. I thought in season 2, the Avatar state, even early on in the first episode, they're kind of talking about trying to tap into the Avatar state, and they foreshadowed it a lot better. But you do kind of suddenly have this person who has information, they can pass it along to Aang at the very end of the second season. But I was thinking, okay, well, they had some foreshadowing here. They definitely set it up a little bit more in advance with the Appa's last Lost Days, excuse me. Last Days? No, that'd be sad. Appa needs to live for forever. You had some foreshadowing in season 2. And in this, the kind of like, all of a sudden, I don't want to kill people. And then I'm just going to be given kind of an answer as to how to take bending. Maybe if I were to go back and rewatch the show, maybe there would be more hints along the way. But I really feel if this was the long-term solution for how we were going to take out Ozai without having to have Aang kill him, then I kind of wish we had set this up a little bit more. I think it sort of resulted in it feeling kind of convenient. And I'm not saying I wish that he had just killed him, because that's not necessarily where I'm going with this. I just wish we could have set this up a little bit better. And I think it's kind of odd that all 3 seasons had something to this extent. But also, I just want to say, Aang has totally killed people. Maybe not on purpose, but in season 1, he's slicing through ships when he turns into a giant ice monster, basically. He's slicing through the Fire Nation ships in the middle of freezing water. So I'm like, somebody fell into the water and froze and died. Right? Somebody died. But let's pretend nobody died and they all swam to safety. So now let's look at in the Air Temple episode where we have the tanks basically going up the cliffside, and it literally shows the chains being cut and then the tanks fall, and then just segues on over to a different scene. And I'm like, those people died. I'm sorry, you fell off the side of a cliff. You're dead. Aang's definitely killed people. But, you know, he didn't mean to, maybe. So I suppose there's that. But when this became such a thing, I think I even wrote in my notes. Where did I write in my notes? I wrote something, never taken a life, and then 3 question marks. I knew I had written something while I was watching. Anyway, so I didn't think that that was the strongest plot element of this final chunk, but it wasn't the end of the world. It was kind of one of my only negatives. Everything else was really spectacular visually, and it was really action-packed. I don't love now that the journey's over, Aang and Katara can smooch, and she's thought about it, and she's like, things are chill now, so we can be together. I don't know if I needed Aang and Katara to get together. I don't think I needed that. It's not that I'm saying, like, why couldn't she end up with Zuko or something? It's not that. I just don't know. I think we could have left off with, like, oh, he still kind of has a crush on her, and maybe in the future when, I don't know, maybe it's, like, hinted at that they're going to maybe see each other in a different way. I don't know. I just don't think I needed that. There's another show I really want to mention, another story. It's also a manga that I just kind of want to be like, these 2 people, you literally never see them romantically involved, but everybody's like, they're together. And that's kind of what I wish we could have left off on with the 2 of them. But I'm very much all over the place with Sozin's comment, so let's get back to the notes so I can go in order. So I wrote, going back to the very beginning of Sozin's comment, if you need a refresher, they start out at the beach, basically, and I wrote in my notes, please not another beach day, and it was fine, it didn't turn to a beach day. But I wrote, not the sand appa, because they made a sand appa, and then it got hit, and I was like, oh no. I wrote, finally the war meeting, because I'd been waiting for so long, wondering, why didn't we see the war meeting? That was one of the few times we would have gotten to see Zuko have some kind of interaction, or some kind of reflection on what's transpiring around him, and we finally got to see it, and I was like, oh good. So I did appreciate that we got a sneak peek into it. Do I think we needed to wait this long for us to see this? I don't know, but I don't think it's ultimately a deal breaker. I think the pacing in the first half of this season, one, I don't think it was as strong as the pacing in most of the second season, because the second season was chef's kiss. It was so good. And then the pacing in this second half of this season has just been such a whirlwind. And I just feel like this first half of the season was a little wobbly. So I think I would have preferred to see a little more Zuko in the beginning of the season and in a different fashion than we saw him in. But I'm glad that we did finally see the war meeting. Toph didn't really get to have, it was sad, she didn't really get to have a life-changing field trip with Zuko, because he was like, okay, I know you've had it rough, but we kind of need to find Aang. And I was like, oh man, Toph's finally being like sensitive and opening up. And Zuko's like, sorry, I can't really talk about you right now. So I thought that was kind of sad, but also kind of funny. For the next part of Sozin's comment, I wrote Old Guys Club and then Iroh, and I was so excited about this. I feel bad for Sokka's master because he's kind of not as powerful in this moment as the other guys, as Boomy, and I forget the fire master's name, the other fire master, but him and Iroh, and then there's Sokka's master, and I'm like, what are you gonna do with a sword? These guys have like the strength of a comet, and then the other one is just a really powerful old earthbender, and then this guy is like, I'm really good with swords. I was like, well, I'm glad that you're helpful in this endeavor, but talk about feeling a little inadequate, you know? I also wrote all Zuko and Iroh, and that moment, I didn't really write anything else about that moment because I just watched that moment and I enjoyed it for what it was, and Zuko crying, oh my gosh, and Iroh, like them being emotional together. I've been waiting for this moment, I feel like for so long, and then we finally get it, and it was it's making me emotional to think about. It was as emotional and beautiful and wonderful as I had hoped. It did take so long. It did mean that we got so little of Iroh all season, and I don't know if I can say it was worth it, but I'm also not upset because this moment was fantastic and a long time coming, and I think they did an exceptional job with it. And they had to throw in a cute little bit of humor when Zuko says, you have a pretty strong scent. I thought that was funny. But now moving into the next section. So this is when the action sequence really starts to take off. And at one point, we have Sokka and Suki and Toph kind of go off in their own area trying to take out what are basically like war planes. And so you see, I wrote in my notes, Toph becoming a door monster was awesome. I don't know if you guys remember this, but she pretty much goes up to this metal door and then she just kind of like forms herself into it. Then she rolls and then just annihilates everybody. And I was like, that was pretty cool. Toph is so cool. And then I felt bad for the random Fire Nation guy where they're like, hey, a report here. And the guy's like, he remembered it was my birthday. And then they're in the ocean because they get knocked off of their war balloon blimp plane things. I also wrote good music for Ozai Aang fight. I appreciate the music. I do feel like they bring the theme back a lot, and the way in which they brought the theme back for the Ozai Aang fight was, I thought, fantastic. It was kind of like upped to the nth degree. And then it was mostly the Aang Ozai fight for a lot of the rest of it, and it was great. There's not a whole lot to comment on necessarily with specifics. I do want to get into the Zuko-Azula fight. So the Azula plotline went about exactly like I thought it would because the beach episode made it, for me, I thought, really obvious. I think that episode was so heavy-handed, and now that I've gotten to the end of it, I can firmly say that I did not like that episode. And again, I really want to emphasize that I'm not saying I think it is objectively bad. And I also think that really important pivotal things happened in that episode. I just can't stand the execution of it. And I do feel like everything was so extremely heavy-handed. There is one thing I find super funny, which is the fact that Ty Lee was like, I never got to stand out, and it was so difficult. And you're kind of like, what problem is that compared to their problems? But then she joins the Kyoshi Warriors. That's hilarious. That's super funny. So I almost feel like I like the beach episode more for that alone. However, Azula's sort of madness, I felt like they kind of, they made it too clear that that's, in my opinion, that's the direction it was going to go, with this kind of like, I don't even care that my mom liked Zuko more. Did it hurt? I mean, like, yeah, but, and then obviously she's been this perfectionist the whole time. She doesn't sound like that. just to be clear, the voice actress is great. I'm just trying to impersonate her obnoxious, snooty, pretentious voice, and I didn't do a very good job. The voice actor's great. There's no shade towards her. But anywho, so I'm glad that they sort of left it without her getting her own, like, oh, but Azula, I know you didn't mean any of it in the long. I'm glad that it didn't wrap up in a perfect bow with her, because I think for a lot of endings to feel like like they are not just a perfectly tied up bow. You need some unanswered questions. You need it to feel like something will extend on past this, which I know there's comics and they explore that. And I know obviously there's things to do with Zuko's mom because you see him questioning Ozai at the end. And so I don't know what transpires with Azula, but regardless, my main point just being I'm glad that it wasn't like, oh, well, now that your brother's here, everything can be all better. It wasn't like that, and I think that that's a good thing. There were some things that wrapped up really nicely because at the end of the day, they accomplished their goal of defeating Ozai. So there is that heroic, triumphant nature of the end of this whole show, but I think that by having Azula still in the state that she's in by the end of this and have her be somebody that at the end of the day Zuko will have to consider and he'll have to consider his father, there are obstacles still as we move forward. So I think that that was done really, really well. I just think I kind of wish we had gotten more time with Azula also. I believe I mentioned in last week's, it was only technically 2 weeks ago because by the time this goes up 2 weeks will have passed. But regardless, the last batch reviews, I talked about how I was wondering if Ozai would believe Zuko in regards to the Avatar being killed. And if he did, then I would expect him to have some questions for Azula. And apparently he didn't have any because we didn't see him reprimand her. We didn't see him question her. We didn't see him ask her, why weren't you thorough in ensuring that the Avatar was indeed dead? You don't see any of that. It's just, oh, I'm promoting you now to this higher station. So it's been probably one of my consistent gripes, I suppose you could say, about the season, which is just that I wish we'd gotten more of Azula and Ozai and Zuko in that dynamic. Or if Zuko's out of the picture, then more of Ozai and Azula, and just more Azula too. I wish we'd gotten more with her. But anyway, the fight itself with Zuko and Azula, I am guessing I have the very unpopular opinion of having a tiny frustration with this, which is just that this is not an Avatar specific thing. This is a thing I have for pretty much all action scenes, fight scenes, where you have an advantage and you forego the advantage for some kind of personal thing. The practical side of me is like, don't do that. The stakes are too high. So what I mean by that is, in this particular instance, Katara is there and Zuko's like, no, it's just going to be between us. And I'm like, that's silly. Have Katara help you. And then of course Katara runs out and I'm like, she's going to Azula's going to try to hit her with the lightning, and then Zuko's, and which is what happened. Because Katara just like runs out in the middle. And then I'm guessing Katara didn't use bloodbending because she's decided, like, never again. Which isn't exactly stated, but that's my guess after what happens in the Southern Raiders episode, because you do see her use it a little bit there. But there was a tiny part of me that's like, we could end this in a second if she just used bloodbending against Azula and you wouldn't have to have this big fight between... But again, there's emotional stakes. I know there's emotional stakes in that fight, and it is a big moment. It's a pivotal moment for Azula and Zuko. I just almost wish we could have found a way to have Katara not be there and then just have had it be a fight between Zuko and Azula. I don't like that Katara's there and it's like, step aside. And then things go wrong and then Katara has to be the one to handle Azula anyway. I'm kind of like, That's not my favorite. It's such a tiny thing to say. It's just a tiny thing to say. It's just a weird thing I have in any type of story where one army, this happens in fantasy all the time, where there'll be like this massive army that for sure has the upper hand against another army, and they're like, how about a contest of champions? So it's just you and I. And I'm like, so it's just you and me. Anyway, but why? When you're like, no, but they'll win. I understand that you don't want to sacrifice other people. You don't want people to die, but also the chance that your entire army is just like off to the side and it all comes down to one person when you clearly are gonna win. I always get irritated a tiny bit at that. So I think that this fight was important, and I think it was a cool fight, and I understand the emotional aspects of this and the kind of conclusion to their arc, because you have seen them going at it constantly. But that tiny little element of it, just the tiniest bit, irritated me. Anyway, now for the very last kind of overall thoughts, which is just that the show is finally over and I'm kind of sad because it's been so much fun to watch this. It's been such a roller coaster. It's a phenomenal show. It deserves the hype, in my opinion. It deserves all the love it has. And I think because of how great this show is, because of its themes, because of how well they depicted so much of importance in this, I think that what I was saying about how wonderful the fandom has been, I think it is kind of this reciprocal. The fandom is great because of the messaging of the show, and the show has continued to have new people come to it and fall in love with it, even to this day, because those themes are just so impactful. I think it has, I completely understand why so many people love it. I understand all the nostalgia for it, and I feel like I definitely want to continue doing other shows in this fashion where we go through and do batch episodes and we review those and we discuss those. But man, what a high bar to start this potential video series off with Avatar. It's just like, I feel kind of bad for Attack on Titan because that's the next one, which I'm so looking forward to. And if you've never watched Attack on Titan, I think it'll be a lot of fun for us to kind of come together and watch it together. But for those of you that are fans of Attack on Titan, I can't wait because I've heard really good things, and I maybe will sneak in some Vinland Saga in the middle of all this as well. I was going to wait till the weather was colder because it feels more fitting given the setting for Vinland Saga, but I really don't want to wait. And then of course, this year we have Arcane Season 2, so there's going to be more Arcane content, and then I'll probably be rewatching Arcane, doing all that. But anyway, back to Avatar. I really would love to know, now that we have finished up this series, what have been your absolute favorite episodes overall, your favorite moments, who are your favorite characters, and you don't have to worry about spoilers anymore, so you can go as in-depth as you would like in the comments officially. As I said before, I will be posting things over on the community tab to ask your opinions, and then also I will post things probably on my Patreon as well to ensure I get through my patrons' responses as just a thank you to patrons. But this has been so great. Thank you so much to all of you who have joined me in this. Thank you so much to all of you who have let me know your thoughts as we get through things. All of you for making sure not to spoil me on stuff. I really appreciate it. It's been great. But I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.